Thomas Earl Petty was born on October 20th, 1950, in Gainesville, Florida. The town wasn't known for music. It was hot, southern, and slow, but it was the place that shaped one of the most honest voices in American rock. His childhood was far from easy. Tom's father, Earl, was physically abusive and often temperamental. His mother, Kitty, was more nurturing but remained emotionally withdrawn. Tom once recalled that music was the only thing in his life that ever made sense. His refuge wasn't school or sports, it was a transistor radio and a stack of 45s. One of the most pivotal moments in Tom's life came in 1961 when he was just 11 years old. He met Elvis Presley not in some backstage meet and greet, but during the filming of Follow That Dream in nearby Ocala. The experience left a deep mark on him. That same week, Tom traded his slingshot for a stack of Elvis records. From that point on, rock and roll wasn't just a fantasy, it was his path out. Around this time, the Beatles also arrived on American television screens, and like many kids of that era, Tom was stunned. It wasn't just the music. It was the image, the freedom, the hair, the rebellion. He'd later say that seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show made me want to be in a band more than anything. In high school, Tom became obsessed with guitar. He'd lock himself in his room and teach himself chords from records. He joined a few local garage bands, most notably the Epics, and started playing small gigs around Gainesville. Later, the Epics would evolve into Mudcrutch, a band that would play a massive role in Petty's story, but not the way anyone expected. Tom was never a flashy guitar god or a trained vocalist. His voice had a scratchy, nasal twang, and his look was far from glamorous. But what he had even early on was attitude, drive, and an ability to write songs that felt real. In the late 1960s, while the world was turning psychedelic, Petty and Mudcrutch leaned into roots rock, inspired by the Byrds, the band, and the raw side of rock and roll. He was already showing signs of the man he'd become, an outsider with a deep sense of musical integrity. By the early 1970s, Petty was leading Mudcrutch, a band that had become one of the most popular groups in the Gainesville scene. The lineup included future Heartbreakers Mike Campbell on guitar and Benmont Tench on keys, musicians that would become essential to Petty's sound for the next 4 decades. Mudcrutch had the energy, the talent, and a growing local following. But Gainesville was a small pond, and Petty had a bigger vision. In 1974, he convinced the band to pack up and move to Los Angeles, the city where labels, producers, and opportunity lived. They got signed quickly as a rarity. Shelter Records, co-founded by Leon Russell and Denny Cordell, saw promise in Petty and gave Mudcrutch a shot. But when the band released their debut single, Depot Street, in 1975, it flopped. The record label wasn't impressed. Denny Cordell made a decision that changed everything. He dropped the band but kept Tom. Mudcrutch broke up, but Petty stayed in L.A., feeling heartbroken and furious. He had just uprooted his life and watched his band fall apart. Still, he kept writing. He stayed in touch with Campbell and Tench, who were still working as session musicians around the city. Meanwhile, Benmont Tench started casually recording demos of his own songs and brought in Campbell and other Florida friends to help. When Petty heard those recordings, something clicked. He realized they had lightning in a bottle. This wasn't just a group of session players. This was a band. That band became Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. They were signed by Shelter Records again, this time under Petty's name, and released their self-titled debut in 1976. The album didn't explode right away in the US, but it caught fire in the UK, especially the single Anything That's Rock and Roll. But it was the second single, Breakdown, that slowly started to make waves in America. Then came American Girl, a jangly, nervy anthem full of energy, longing, and heart. It didn't chart high at first, but over the years, it became one of the most iconic songs in rock history. The sound was raw but melodic. Petty's voice was defiant and honest. And suddenly, a Florida kid who almost gave up after one flop was on his way to becoming one of the defining voices of American rock. By 1977, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were picking up steam. The band's unique blend of Southern swagger, British invasion jangle, and working-class grit gave them a sound that felt both classic and fresh. With Petty at the front, flanked by guitar wizard Mike Campbell, keyboardist Benmont Tench, bassist Ron Blair, and drummer Stan Lynch, the Heartbreakers didn't look like your typical rock stars, and that was the point. They weren't glitter or glam. They were jeans and leather, guitars and grit. Their second album, You're Gonna Get It, dropped in 1978. It featured tighter production, stronger hooks, and two standout singles, I Need to Know and Listen to Her Heart. The record cracked the top 40 and proved that the band wasn't a one-album wonder. But things were about to explode. Their third album, Damn the Torpedoes, 1979, was the one that took them from respected to legendary. Produced by Jimmy Iovine, the album was a perfect storm, killer songwriting, fierce band chemistry, and sonic polish that didn't kill their edge. Refugee hit like a punch to the chest. Don't Do Me Like That became their first top 10 single. Here Comes My Girl was as romantic as it was rebellious. Critics loved it. Fans bought it. The album went triple platinum. But while it seemed like Tom Petty was flying high, behind the scenes, he was gearing up for war. Just as Damn the Torpedoes was about to be released, Petty found out that his label, Shelter Records, had been absorbed by MCA Records, a corporate giant he hadn't signed with and didn't trust. To Petty, this wasn't just a business move, it was a betrayal. He refused to be bought and sold like a piece of meat, as he put it. And so, in a move almost unheard of at the time, he sued MCA, declared bankruptcy as a legal strategy to void his contract, and refused to deliver the album. For over a year, lawyers went back and forth. The music industry watched in disbelief. Most artists just rolled over. Not Petty. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting against the system that trapped musicians in unfair contracts. Eventually, MCA caved. Petty got a new deal under their subsidiary label, Backstreet Records, on his terms. And when Damn the Torpedoes finally dropped, it didn't just succeed, it became a declaration of independence. Fans weren't just buying the music, they were buying into the attitude. Petty became a symbol of artistic freedom. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room. He didn't give big speeches. He just stood his ground and won. And that wasn't the last time he'd do it. After the massive success of Damn the Torpedoes, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were no longer just a promising band, they were a fixture in American rock. But Petty wasn't interested in coasting. He was obsessed with making the next record even better. Their follow-up, Hard Promises, 1981, featured fan favorites like The Waiting and A Woman in Love, It's Not Me. The album was another hit, but what really made headlines this time wasn't the songs, it was the price tag. MCA Records tried to raise the album's retail price from $8.98 to $9.98, citing Petty's popularity as justification. Most artists would have shrugged and let it slide. Not Petty. He refused to release the album at the higher price, threatening to title it $8.98 in protest. He saw it as corporate greed that would hurt fans, especially working-class ones, like the kind who filled his shows. After a tense standoff, MCA backed down and released the album at the standard price. Petty had once again stood up to a giant, and won. Fans noticed. So did other musicians. He wasn't just making great music, he was building a legacy of integrity. The 80s rolled on with more hits, You Got Lucky, with a pioneering synth-rock sound, Don't Come Around Here No More, a trippy, sitar-laced anthem with a surreal Alice in Wonderland video, Rebels and Southern accents, which leaned into Petty's Southern roots and identity. But not everything was smooth behind the scenes. The band dynamics grew strained. Stan Lynch, the drummer, clashed frequently with Petty over direction and personality. There were drugs, exhaustion, and the mounting pressure of constant success. Petty also dealt with a devastating house fire in 1987, believed to be arson, that destroyed nearly everything his family owned. They barely escaped with their lives. But as always, Petty stayed grounded in the one thing that never failed him, the music. In 1989, Tom Petty did something fans didn't expect, he went solo. Sort of. He released Full Moon Fever, technically a solo album, but still packed with familiar collaborators like Mike Campbell and Jeff Lynne, of ELO and Traveling Wilburys fame. The result? A career-defining record. It gave us Free Fallin', I Won't Back Down, and Runnin' Down a Dream. The album was a monster hit, triple platinum, endlessly replayed, and beloved by multiple generations. Free Fallin' became one of the most iconic songs of his entire career, a bittersweet, California-soaked track that sounded like freedom and heartbreak all at once. It was simple, honest, timeless. I Won't Back Down, meanwhile, became an anthem of resistance, used by everyone from political campaigns to soldiers at war, though Petty often rejected its use in partisan settings. The message was universal: no matter what you're facing, don't fold. Petty's solo work showed that he could step out of the Heartbreakers' shadow, but he never fully left them. They remained his musical family. Campbell and Tinch were always nearby, even if the records carried his name alone. Around this time, Petty also became a part of the Traveling Wilburys, a supergroup that included George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne. It was like watching the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame jam in a garage. Their song Handle with Care was a gentle reminder that these guys weren't trying to be cool, they already were. They just wanted to make music and have fun doing it. Petty, the youngest Wilbury, brought a youthful energy to the group, but he also brought his songwriting chops and vocal grit. The project gave him a second wind, showing that even among legends, he belonged. As the 1990s began, Tom Petty was flying high, at least on the outside. He had one of the most successful records of his career with Full Moon Fever, a supergroup with legends in the Traveling Wilburys, and a loyal fan base that had followed him for over a decade. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling. In 1991, Petty released Into the Great Wide Open, another album technically with the Heartbreakers, but very much an extension of the Full Moon Fever sound. It included hits like the title track and Learning to Fly, a song that felt like a continuation of Free Fallin', full of hope, but touched with sadness. The music was good, really good, but Petty was dealing with things music couldn't fix. His 22-year marriage to Jane Benyo was falling apart. The two had been high school sweethearts in Gainesville, and while their bond lasted for decades, it had become toxic. Petty later revealed that the marriage was emotionally damaging and that he struggled for years to cope. The divorce, finalized in 1996, broke him, and so did the aftermath. For the first time in his life, Petty fell into a deep depression, and eventually into drug use, specifically heroin. It was a side of Petty the public never saw. He wasn't the wild rocker type. He was the laid-back, working-class guy. But inside, he was hurting. He described the heroin use as a desperate attempt to numb the emotional pain that he didn't know how to talk about. To his credit, Petty got help. He entered rehab quietly and never glorified the experience. In fact, he was open about how ashamed he was and how lucky he felt to come out the other side. And out of that pain, he made one of his most raw and honest records, Wildflowers, 1994. Wildflowers wasn't just an album, it was a soul exposed. Produced by Rick Rubin, the album marked a shift away from the radio-friendly gloss of Petty's earlier work. It was stripped down, intimate, and devastating in its vulnerability. The title track, Wildflowers, was a simple, beautiful message to someone that maybe his ex-wife, maybe himself, to go live freely, to find peace, to grow. You belong somewhere you feel free. It became one of the most beloved songs of his entire career. Then there were songs like It's Good to Be King and Crawling Back to You, which exposed the doubts and insecurities that fame had never cured. Wildflowers was Petty saying, "I'm not okay, but I'm trying." The record didn't have a bunch of radio hits, but it connected deeply with fans, especially those who were growing older, facing divorces, loss, and change of their own. Petty wasn't preaching. He was just being real. Critics praised Wildflowers as a mature, masterful album, and many consider it his greatest work. For Petty, it was more than just a record. It was therapy. "There's not a false note on that record," he once said. "It's me, exactly how I was." And though it was released under his name, most of the Heartbreakers played on it, especially Mike Campbell, his lifelong right-hand man. That musical bond, stretching back to Mudcrutch, remained one of the most consistent relationships in Petty's life. Wildflowers was a turning point. Not just musically, but emotionally. It showed that Petty wasn't just the guy behind the sunglasses and guitar, he was a survivor, someone who'd taken punches and kept getting back up. And the best part? He wasn't done yet. As Tom Petty entered the 2000s and beyond, many artists from his generation were slowing down. Petty didn't. He kept touring, kept recording, and most importantly, he kept creating with intention. In 2006, he released Highway Companion, a reflective solo album that explored themes of time, distance, and fading youth. Songs like Saving Grace and Down South felt like postcards from a man still on the move, but beginning to glance in the rearview mirror. And then, something surprising happened. In 2007, Petty revived Mudcrutch, the band he had formed decades earlier in Gainesville, before the Heartbreakers ever existed. He reunited with original members Tom Leadon, Randall Marsh, Mike Campbell, and Ben Montench, and they recorded a full-length album. For Petty, this wasn't just nostalgia, it was about unfinished business. Mudcrutch had never been given a real shot, and now, finally, they could make music on their own terms. The 2008 Mudcrutch album was earthy, jammy, and filled with a looser, more spontaneous spirit than the polished Heartbreakers records. Petty even played bass, as he did in the original lineup. Critics loved it, and so did longtime fans. They would release a second album, Mudcrutch 2, in 2016, further proof that Petty wasn't chasing hits anymore. He was chasing joy, friendship, closure. But while Petty was returning to his roots, he wasn't ignoring his legacy. In 2014, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers released Hypnotic Eye, a fiery, politically charged record that debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, his first ever. At 63, Petty had achieved a new kind of success, not as a hitmaker, but as an elder statesman of American rock. And in 2017, to mark the 40th anniversary of the Heartbreakers, Petty and the band launched what would become their final tour. They played arenas, festivals, and stadiums across the U.S., bringing out classics like Refugee, American Girl, You Got Lucky, and Free Fallin'. Fans of all ages came, some who'd followed him since 1976, others discovering him for the first time. Despite health issues, including a fractured hip and emphysema, Petty powered through the tour. He didn't cancel shows. He didn't complain. He told his bandmates, "We're not going to stop until we play the Hollywood Bowl." And on September 25, 2017, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers closed out the tour with a sold-out show at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles. It was their final performance. Nobody knew it at the time. Just 1 week later, on October 2, 2017, Tom Petty was found unconscious in his Malibu home after suffering cardiac arrest. He was rushed to the hospital, but never regained consciousness. That evening, the news was confirmed: Tom Petty was dead at 66. The world was stunned. Fans, musicians, and media across the globe mourned the loss. Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Stevie Nicks, and countless others paid tribute. For many, it felt like the death of the last great American rock voice. It was later revealed that Petty had been in severe pain throughout the entire tour. He had fractured his hip before the tour began but insisted on finishing it. His family stated that he died from an accidental overdose of pain medications, including fentanyl, which he had been using to get through the shows. Tom Petty died doing what he loved, performing, connecting, and refusing to quit. In the years that followed, his legacy only grew. In 2020, a massive deluxe reissue of Wildflowers was released, including unreleased songs, home demos, and live recordings. It offered fans a deeper look into his most personal work. His estate, family, and bandmates have worked to preserve his music with care and respect. A documentary, Tom Petty, Somewhere You Feel Free, was released in 2021, built from behind-the-scenes footage during the making of Wildflowers. But more than anything, Petty lives on in the songs. Songs that don't age. Songs that don't lie. Songs that tell the truth even when it hurts. Tom Petty never had the flashiest voice. He wasn't a shredder. He didn't reinvent genres. What he did was cut through the noise with heart, grit, and honesty. He stood up to labels. He stood up for fans. He put the music and the message first. And for millions of people over multiple generations, that was more than enough. Tom Petty didn't chase fame, it chased him. From Gainesville to the Hollywood Bowl, he stayed true to who he was: a fighter, a poet, a rock and roll lifer. If his music ever helped you get through something, leave a comment below. What's your Tom Petty song? Thanks for watching Southern Sound. And remember, you belong somewhere you feel free.